So, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. I'm San Harper of the Guild of Mindful Driver Trainers, and I've been in the driver training industry for 18 years now. My career has involved both teaching learners to drive, delivering speed awareness courses, as well as assessing taxi drivers and people who drive for their work. So after qualifying to teach a range of mindfulness-based interventions, I now train people to use mindfulness and compassion techniques both in the driver training and corporate sectors. So mindfulness is a mental state that is achieved through focusing attention on the current moment, coupled with non-judgmental approach to our current experience. And it's recognised by the NHS as a method of improving mental awareness. So first of all, I'd just like to welcome you all. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And of course, I'd like to thank our guest speaker, Dr. Victoria Kroll, for being here today. So Victoria is a published traffic and transport psychologist who's previously worked alongside Professor David Crundall at Nottingham Trent University and has led researchers on numerous successful projects aimed at improving road safety. So Victoria now runs their spin-out company from the university, eSitu Solutions, with the aim of commercialising their research for the fleet driver training market. So the talk this evening will last around about half an hour, and there'll be time for questions afterwards. You can either write in the chat if you prefer, or if you'd like to unmute and just notify us that you've got a question, that's totally fine. Okay, so before I hand over to Victoria this evening, I'd just like to, just while the last few people join the session, I'd just like to invite you just to take a moment, just to notice what it feels like just to simply stop for a moment. I'm sure some of you have had perhaps things going on today. You might have been busy. It might be the first time you've actually sat down all day, or indeed all weekend. But just inviting you to just take a moment just to land in the space that you're in. Feel free to either close the eyes or lower the gaze, whichever feels okay for you. And just notice what it feels like for you at the moment. Just maybe what the weather, the internal weather is for you today. And then just taking a moment now just to notice how it is for you in the mouth, whether there's clenching, where the tongue's positioned right now for you. The jaw, just noticing if you're holding any tension in the jaw. Often we hold tension in the jaw or the shoulders and we don't even realise that we're doing it. Just taking a moment just to notice how that is for you. And you might also notice a feeling of the air as it comes in at the nostrils. Maybe it feels cooler as it comes in. And you can perhaps just have a sense of just letting go of anything that you might have been carrying with you today, if that feels okay for you on that out breath. Just letting go of anything you might be carrying with you, just for the next 40 minutes. Okay, so just without further ado, I'd just like to hand over to Dr. Victoria Kroll. Thank you, Victoria. Over to you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to share my slides now, so just let me know if they are okay, if that's all right. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to do this talk. As you've already said, my name is Dr. Victoria Kroll, and by trade, I guess I am a traffic and transport psychologist. And prior to setting up the company eSitu Solutions, I worked as a traffic and transport psychologist, which again, you've probably never heard of, but it's basically we apply psychology to making drivers safer, making the road safer. And I did this after I finished my PhD at Nottingham Trent as a postdoctoral researcher alongside Professor David Crundall, where we developed lots of tools for making drivers safer, a lot of them based around sort of hazard perception and risk-taking tools. And these are the stuff that we are commercializing, like Sam says, with the company, but that's a different story. Here today, I'm going to talk to you about a study that I ran as the lead researcher for 2 years during my time at Nottingham Trent University. And this particular study does have a special place in my heart because it was the first study that I did coming back from maternity leave after having my daughter. So it really got me back into the research. And I remember sort of David ringing me and being like, oh, I've got a study for you to do. And I said, oh, okay, what is it then? And he says, it's about mindfulness and driving. And I said, huh? Okay. that's something I've never really put, two and two together at a particular point in time. But I sort of thought, well, we'll give it a go and see what happens. And I was pleasantly surprised, as you're going to hear when we go through the talk. So I want to talk to you about a little bit about mindfulness. Sam sort of said some stuff about it already, so I might be repeating some stuff she's already said, and talk about the research that we ran and the findings that we found at the end. And then obviously I'm happy to take any questions at the end. So before much further ado, let's crack on. I can press next slide. Right, here we go. Okay, so we all know that driving is dangerous. It's one of the most dangerous things that we can do. In fact, 1.3 million people die on the roads every single year as a road traffic collision. And we need we need methods to help reduce these collisions. We need to stop the fatalities happening. But what are the causes of some of the dangers on the road? Well, one of the main ones is obviously distraction. You've got in-car distraction. You might have passengers. You might have small children in the car that are causing you to be distracted. You might have distractions outside of the car, billboards, other road users, other things that are taking your attention away from the driving task. Also things such as route familiarity and boredom, even your own internal thoughts might be stopping you, making you from being as good a driver as you could be and making mistakes. And also cognitive overload. If you've got lots of things going on, you might not be concentrating necessarily on the road, which can cause a danger. Also things like road rage, not necessarily your own rage, but other drivers' road rage. And also risky driving, again, speeding, going through red lights, tailgating, all of these things that are dangerous and cause problems on the road. One of the things, particularly one of the biggest things, is distraction. And that one of those things can lead to repetitive driving. So, driving without awareness, essentially. So how many times have you been driving along the road and suddenly you go, how did I get here? You haven't paid attention to where you've been. Repetitive driving as well, it can lead to reduced speed, lane variability, and also increases in change blindness. So that's where you're looking at the scene and you fail to notice large changes within that scene. Also, if you've been driving the same route every day for many weeks or days or even years, often we find that you start to pay less attention. So we ran one study, David ran one study where they took a driving instructor, got them to drive the same route for about 20 times, and they measured their eye movements during this. And what they found was towards the end of those 20 drives, they were actually making fewer safety related fixations. So they were looking less at the safety relevant content within the road on it. So again, repetitive driving can be really dangerous. So what can we do to help mitigate repetitive driving and all the things that happen within that? Well, one thing that we can look at is obviously mindfulness. I should probably caveat this and say I'm not a mindfulness expert. If there are any mindfulness specific questions, you're best to probably direct them at Sam, but I can try and give you an explanation of what it is. So as Sam said, it is a meditative mental state that is achieved through focusing current attention on the current moment coupled with a non-judgmental approach to current practices and experiences. So through training and exercises, practitioners learn to reduce thinking about negative experience and allowing concentration on the present. And there's been so much academic research with mindfulness and the benefits that it has. And it's now been established in a range of medical and behavioural contexts. So it's been found to reduce pain, even anxiety, eating and mood disorders, sexual dysfunction, and even behavioural addiction. And all of this evidence is so much there that in fact that even the NHS now is using it within a range of these different contexts. So there's a lot of research that goes behind mindfulness, and a lot of the things behind it are widely used now. But is there going to be any benefit for driving? Well, if we take a look at some of the things that mindfulness can do, so beyond the reported health benefits of mindfulness, there's several studies that have shown that several higher order cognitive functions such as sustained attention, executive function, and working memory can all be improved by mindfulness. And crucially, all of these things are really critical for safe driving. So it's therefore been suggested that it could be a tool for improving particularly novice driver safety. What about mindfulness in driving? Is there any evidence for mindfulness improving a safer driver? We know that it's got lots of health benefits, but what about specifically to driving? Well, there is some evidence that suggests that those who score higher on mindfulness scales demonstrate safer driving behaviours. So a study by Feldman showed that those drivers who have a higher natural disposition for mindfulness have reported less mobile phone related collisions. Also, those with trait mindfulness is related to lower engagement with distracting tasks, reducing anger, lower risk, and increased safety behaviours. For all of these, they rely on self-report. And with self-report, there's often a lot of biases. People are trying to act in a socially desirable way and behave as if the experimenter wants them to, and they want to look good essentially when they're filling out these things. However, there was some experimental evidence that showed that those with higher mindfulness were paying more attention when they were in a driving simulator. So while cause and effect can't really be confirmed within all of these studies, there is a suggestion that mindfulness training could produce positive benefits for driver safety. So based on all of this literature, we wanted to ask whether mindfulness could be that silver bullet to help mitigate driver distraction, reduce road rage, whilst improving driver skills and hazard perception. However, while it's kind of tempting to think, oh yes, it's going to be that perfect solution for all of those, there are a few things that we did have in mind that we thought, perhaps these could be a potential problem. So I'll just talk to you about a couple of these. So first of all is that typically mindfulness courses, they can last up to 8 weeks. And this kind of really reduces the appeal for the self-selected minority who want to go and use those. If we think about the speed awareness course, for those who are caught speeding, those courses last just 4 hours, and it's only really the threat of the fact that they're going to get 3 points on the license if they don't go that makes them actually go. So if we want to have a mindfulness course, we really need it to be given within a similar time frame. However, there is some evidence that suggests that relatively brief mindfulness training sessions can produce benefits. One study demonstrated that just a brief 75-minute course, although it was spread over 3 days, still had positive impacts. However, this wasn't necessarily within driving context. Also, there was the further issue of what we call the automation problem. So when we think about driving, a lot of driving, the things that we do are automated. For example, changing gear. We don't really think about doing that. It's an automated process. And this is one of the reasons believed that experienced drivers are safer than novice drivers, because they've really automated that process. So by making it automatic, our limited attention has got more space, and that attention that's been freed up can be redeployed towards other things, for example, hazard perception and other cognitive tasks. So there was a worry that if we start bringing back all of that conscious control to those simple tasks, it actually might overload the drivers, and then they might actually increase the risk of a collision. So this is one of the things we really wanted to make sure wasn't going to happen. Another thing that we possibly thought was as well that if you're focusing on all of the events, it might cause what we call attentional tunneling. So that driver who's really focused on that car ahead, they're looking at that car, they're looking for the clues in that car. Is it going to turn off? What's it doing? But you become so focused on the one thing that actually you might completely miss something else within the scene. On the flip side, it could be that because you're so aware of everything else in the scene that you might just miss something huge. So, and this is really important because for novice drivers, they are particularly prone to have narrow search patterns. So within that attentional tunneling, they're already prone to having that. We don't want to make their attention more tunneled towards that. So there really was a lot of things. The evidence was suggesting, that actually there could be some real benefits for it, but also we had to think, well, what if there isn't benefits for it? So this is the whole point of doing research, isn't it? It's to look at the what ifs and really work out what can happen with it. So this is what we did. We had a 12-month research project, and I probably should say that it was funded by the Road Safety Trust. And the whole title of the project was to assess the potential of mindfulness training for improving driver safety. We ran 3 studies. One was based on a 12-hour mindfulness course looking at lab-based measures. The other was a 4-hour course, again, lab-based, and then we took that onto the real road using the 4-hour course that we produced. So I'm going to talk to you about each of the studies in turn. So study 1 was basically a 4-hour course, 3-hour course, that was spread each week for 4 weeks, so 12 hours in total, and we had to get the participants to attend each of these sessions. So what we did, it was essentially a randomized controlled trial, so participants didn't get a choice as to what they did, And we had mindfulness. So we wanted to compare obviously mindfulness, but we couldn't compare that to essentially nothing. We had to compare it to something else. And we wanted to use an active control. So by that, this is because often is to avoid what we call the Hawthorne effect. So if people are being observed, they tend to improve their behavior anyway, just as a fact that they're being observed. So what we really wanted to do, we didn't want participants to know that they were in the experimental condition. So we didn't want them to know that mindfulness is what we were actually looking at. So the way we did it was we marketed the whole thing as knowing oneself versus knowing the vehicle. So they really didn't have a clue that actually it could have been either of those that we were really looking at to see what the outcomes were. And what we did was we tested them on 4 different experiments before they came in, before they did the courses. And this was to get their baseline of their performance within this. And then we tested them afterwards as well. We also gave them lots of different questionnaires as well, but I'm probably not going to talk so much about that just purely because of time. The course that we had developed for the mindfulness was actually run by a ex-Buddhist monk. So he really knew what he was doing in terms of the mindfulness course. Unfortunately, I didn't really get to attend the course because I was too busy running around taking registers and making sure that everyone had turned up for it. And the course, the car maintenance course that we ran as the active control, was run by Nottingham College as well. So one of the things, we originally aimed to recruit 96 participants. So I'm putting this in here because I think it's really important to know the logistics behind the study. Me and another researcher who actually ran the project with me, we often have this joke of whenever we come to a new research project, we go, and the recruitment for it looks a bit tricky, we go, but if we can do mindfulness study, we can do anything. Because can you imagine trying to get 96 people to turn up for a lab-based study for an hour and a half and then come for 4 weeks on the trot for a 3-hour course in the evening, essentially, or we did run one in the afternoon as well. The logistics of the whole project was very, very challenging. And it was very difficult to get people to stay. As you can see here, I've highlighted in these circles, in the red circle, we started out with 108 participants, and by the end of it, we actually had 71 who completed everything. So you can see the dropout rate was very big for that. But the participants that did take part, they were fantastic and they were really engaged with the whole thing. I should probably say as well that we also looked for novice drivers. So these were drivers who were either learning to drive or who were within 6 months of passing their driving test. And if anyone's worked with trying to recruit learner drivers before, they are like trying to find a needle in a haystack. They're very hard to find. And even when you do find them, they are notoriously bad at showing up for things. So it was very difficult to recruit the learner drivers for this. That was probably the main challenge of the whole project was essentially getting these novice drivers. The experienced drivers that we used, they had to have had 3 years worth of driving, and that was active driving. So they were driving on a daily basis as well. Using both novices and experience, we could look at how the mindfulness was affecting them, whether it was going to be better for one group of drivers or better for another. So that was really important for us within this first study. But what did we do? So I've spoken about, we gave them these 4 tests. Well, this is what we did. One of the first ones was a driving simulator. So they got to go on our driving simulator at Nottingham Trent, and they drove 2 routes. One was before the training, one was afterwards, and this was counterbalanced across. So they not everyone saw the first one in the pre-test, and not everyone saw the other one in the post-test. In each of the drives, they encountered 10 hazards, and they had to navigate themselves around the hazards. So the hazards include something like, a rogue pedestrian running into the road, again, a dog running into the road, or cars slamming their brakes in front of them. We also looked at driving behaviours such as eye movements as well for this, although the eye movements weren't so easy to analyse in this, so I'm not going to talk about those in this particular study. And we also looked at using the hazard prediction test. So this is essentially our variant of the hazard perception test. So that video is supposed to play, but it's not playing. Essentially, rather than pressing a button when you see a hazard, this test, what it does is it plays up until the point of the hazard. Just as the hazard's about to start, the screen occludes and you get asked what happens next. So this is a measure of hazard awareness, and we've demonstrated this to be a better assessment of driver safety in various contexts across various countries than the hazard perception test. It gets around a lot of the problems of the perception test. Those problems are definitely for another talk, though. That's not for this one. Otherwise, that could be another whole hour. And we also had what we call the mind wandering task. So this was basically a 10-minute drive of a really dull and boring task. So they watched it, and various points throughout the video, we stopped the screen and we asked them, how focused on the task were you? And this was to really tap into, you know, whether the mindfulness could make them more focused on a particular very boring drive. Even when we were watching this, doing the experiment, we got so bored by the time you've watched it like over 80 times, you've had enough of the mind wandering task. And oh, where's it gone? I think I've gone the wrong way. Right, one sec. And of course, we had the road rage task. So in this particular one, we had 20 clips of basically very bad driving. We took these off YouTube with permission, and we asked them several questions. So how severe did they think the incident was on a scale of 1 to 7? How threatening did they think the incident was to their own personal safety? Whether they thought it was an error or a violation, and also the obvious question of how angry does this make you feel on a scale of 1 to 7? And I think the funny thing about this particular study is that obviously when we were testing this, people were sat watching it, and we'd be stood either in the room or sort of outside of the room, and people genuinely would get really angry with this. People would be cursing and swearing, and I'm not even joking, like literally shouting. And it always made me and the other researcher giggle, because it was quite amusing that it actually incited so much rage just from a video within it. So we really knew that this task was tapping into that kind of road rage element. So that was always fantastic to see. I think everyone quite enjoyed this task as well. I know we enjoyed putting it together because you get to see some of the fun bits. So what did we find with all of this? And did the mindfulness training have any impact on driver behaviour? So I'll talk to you about them in turn. So in terms of the driving simulator, one of the things that we did find was that experienced drivers crashed less than the novice drivers, and that's really important because it suggests that actually the driving simulator is tapping into driver skills. So it's validating that drive, it's tapping into that experiential difference between the novices and the experienced. We also found that those who were trained in mindfulness, they did have fewer collisions in the simulator, but it wasn't quite significant. But the trend was definitely in the right way. So that's really positive for this. Another thing that we also found was in terms of the driving style, they found that the speed variation for those who were mindful was lower than those who had been trained in the car maintenance course. So this is suggesting that they were having a smoother drive with fewer bursts of rapid acceleration and fewer instances of harsh braking. And there's obvious benefits from that. You know, if someone's not braking as much, it's better for the environment for one, better for your car. And also, if you're not ramming on your brakes so much, you've got more time to process what's going on around you. And the road rage one. So what we actually found with the road rage one was that for the threat question, novices following the mindfulness training rated that they rated the videos as less threatening to their own personal safety. But I think, and that was not quite as significant, but I think the really important finding from the road rage task was that the novices reported lower road rage following the mindfulness training. We didn't have the same for the experienced drivers, but for the novices, we did find that difference, and we thought that was very interesting. And as you'll see in the next study, that kind of we expand upon that as well. Also, in terms of the mind wandering test, so remember this is the really boring drive, we found that the mindfulness drivers, both novices and experiencers, were rating that they were more focused on the task following the mindfulness training. So again, that's great. It's demonstrating that mindfulness can make you more focused on the task, which is good, even on a boring task when there's not much going on. There wasn't any hazards or anything. So it's really great that that was making them do that. In terms of the eye movements, we also found that there were shorter fixations for novices, which from the eye movement literature suggests that they were actually engaging more with the task, which again is a fantastic finding to find. In terms of the hazard prediction one, so this is our what happens next test. Again, we did find a difference between novices and experienced drivers, which we would hope to find. Experienced drivers were performing better on the test than the novices, which is great. But that's not really to do with mindfulness, that just validates the test. But we didn't find any differences in terms of the mindfulness training on the ability to predict hazards. And we sort of thought, okay, why are the other 3 tests showing benefits for mindfulness training, but hazard prediction one isn't really showing any differences? Well, if we sort of think about it, and if we assume that mindfulness training increases cognitive resources by quietening your inner noise and removing your external and internal distraction, it's easy to extrapolate the benefits of mindfulness and to the mind-wandering task, the road rage task, and even the driving simulator. But the validity of the hazard prediction test is predicated on the ability of safe drivers to know where to look, not just to know where to look, but to also the knowledge of what the clues actually mean. So of all the 4 tests that we have in there, the hazard prediction test is the one that relies most on knowledge. And unfortunately, knowledge is the one thing that mindfulness can't impart exactly. So while it might free up those cognitive resources, it doesn't tell you how to use those cognitive resources. So in retrospect, perhaps it wasn't the best test to use within this. And we actually do swap this for the hazard perception test in the other studies, but I'll talk about it when I get to that bit. So you might be thinking, well, maybe they were just behaving more mindfulness because of what we call demand characteristics. So this is where basically your participants, they guess what you want them to do and they kind of act in that specific way. So if they think that the study's about mindfulness, then they might act more mindful. Again, like I said in the beginning bit, when we were setting up the study, we did position the study as knowing the person versus knowing the car. So we did try and mitigate, the threat of demand characteristics through that. But also, we gave them a questionnaire on at the end of it about how mindful they felt. And actually what we found was that those who've done the mindfulness training, they didn't rate themselves as feeling any more mindful than those who've been through the car maintenance training. So if they were really trying to trick the experimenters that they were behaving in a more mindful way, you'd have thought that they would have rated themselves as more mindful, but they didn't. Also, we had some eye movement differences as well, which are really not under conscious control. You can't train your eye movements, not that I'm aware of, to behave in a specific way. I'm sure some people can. But so I don't really think there wasn't really the threat of the demand characteristics within this, which is really good to hear. So the conclusions from our study 1, the simulator makes a smoother drive, which is fantastic, good for eco driving, good for making people more aware of what they're doing. Made them more focused on a boring task, and it decreased anger, and it did have the eye movements did show greater attention to the hazard as precursors, but there was no difference in terms of their ability to predict the hazards. But the training did take 12 hours over 4 weeks. That is a lot of time to invest in a course, which I know a lot of people would be happy to, but I think it would be greater if we could get it to be a shorter course. One thing I probably didn't mention as well within this is that we took participants' ratings of engagement with the course, and this was a significant predictor within this. So their engagement really played a part in how the mindfulness affect them. Also, the training wasn't driving specific, so it was a generic mindfulness course. There wasn't anything in there about specific to how you would apply that to driving. So what we really wanted to do, it was almost like a proof of concept study 1. What we wanted to do was make it a more tailored approach now. So we wanted to make it more tailored to driving and make it a shorter course. So what we did was we exactly did that. We reduced the course from 12 hours to 4 hours, but made the course very driving specific. So again, we did the same structure. We gave the pre-test, all of those measures, so driving simulator, mind wandering task, road rage task, and we then also now use the hazard perception test. We did all this pre, we did this post with the 4-hour course in the middle. We decided to use the hazard perception test because it's more sensitive to changes in vigilance or sustained attention, which is more likely to be influenced by the mindfulness training. So the mindfulness drivers might not have a greater knowledge of where they should be looking for hazards, but when an obvious hazard does occur, they might be able to respond faster to it. So we replaced that hazard prediction test with that. We also made the pragmatic decision to only go with experienced drivers for study 2, and this was purely based on logistics and the fact that it was so difficult to get the novice drivers for study 1, and I think we probably exhausted all of the willing novice drivers in Nottingham in the first study, so we made that decision, just experienced drivers for this particular study. And again, we compared them to the car maintenance course, so we got Nottingham College to put on that course again for us as well. Again, looking at the retention of participants, the dropout was very high again with it. Even though it was less of a commitment, we started out with 93 participants who we initially recruited, and a lot of them don't even show up to the first lab session, which can be quite frustrating, especially if we blocked out an hour and a half of time for them, but it was fine. In the end, we got 62 people that completed it. So we managed to hit our our target of what we really wanted for this. So what did we find? So bearing in mind it was just a 4-hour course now, that was just with experienced drivers, but a tailored course. So when we looked back at the road rage study, we actually found that it reduced anger for experienced drivers as well, unlike study 1 where the effect was just for the novice drivers. And this is really encouraging because the effects of road rage are very, very far reaching. So for example, drivers exhibiting road rage are more likely to speed, they're more likely to take other risks, so rapidly changing lanes, going for a red light and tailgating. They're also more likely to be involved in a collision. So if used correctly, this a tailored course that can be used with mindfulness to reduce road rage could be a valid tool for those drivers. So this is really great to have this result here within study 2. Unfortunately, within the driving simulator, we lost the effect of the speed variation, although it was in the right trend, it wasn't significant. But we also lost the effect of improved focus. So why did these tests not show that in study 2? Well, one explanation that we think was actually because of the reduction in the length of the course. So in study 1, whilst it was a 12-week course, they also had plenty of opportunity to practice and meditate within that. And it's often argued that to achieve the full benefits of mindfulness, participants need to engage with it regularly. So it's therefore possible that actually just the 4-hour course wasn't enough to get all of those effects that we got in study 1. So perhaps in the next study, which we did, was to provide some kind of homework for them and more opportunities to practice those mindfulness meditations. However, we did find some benefits for the hazard perception. So obviously we replaced this with from the hazard prediction test. So what we found was observed that drivers actually detected more hazards when they've been trained in the mindfulness group, and they clicked more times within the hazard window, and they were faster to detect those hazards. You could be thinking, well, maybe they just pressed loads and that's why, but actually there was no difference in terms of the total number of clicks. So it shows they weren't using a technique of excessive clicking. So if we consider that mindfulness decreases driver distraction, it's possible that the mindfulness trained drivers are calmer and therefore better at anticipating and therefore detecting hazards on the roadway ahead. So while the causal link is not really possible to conclude, it is possible that it's underpinned to some extent by the reduction in anger in the road rage task as well. So as you can see, there's plenty of benefits from study 2. We did find that they were looking for they were responding faster to the hazards, and that there was lower levels of anger. But we did lose that simulator and mind wandering effect as well. And again, this is probably because of the lack of practice, chance to practice their meditative techniques. So what we did was in study 3, we asked our mindfulness trainer to provide these online materials that they could engage with. These were only designed to be sort of 10 minutes, because obviously we didn't want people to give them hours worth of practice, otherwise they might not want to do it. But 10 minutes worth of engagement, and evidence suggests that even these short periods can actually be effective in a non-driving context. So we thought there was some evidence behind that might help. So all of the studies that we've done so far, they were all lab-based. So everything was done in the lab. And whilst it's great to get those results there, it's also great to, if we can extrapolate that into a more real world situation and look at whether mindfulness training can have a benefit for real on-road driving. So what we did was we gave participants dash cameras. So we did again the same kind of study. We did mindfulness training versus the car maintenance, and Notts College again put that course on for us. And prior to those courses, we got the drivers to have dash cameras, which have got basic telematics in them. We had them to put them in their cars for 2 weeks prior to doing the training and 2 weeks after the training. Again, we did have quite a high dropout rate. So we did have 40 people signed up, which dropped to 33 after it had all been done. But again, this was quite an intensive study for them, because they had to make sure the dash cameras were working and had to bring them back after the 2 weeks. So there was a lot of work involved for the participants, but all the participants were absolutely fantastic in this study, and they really enjoyed it. And everyone, the feedback from all of these has been fantastic anyway. But again, we looked at their performance pre and post and comparing this to the car maintenance. This was a very challenging, I'm not gonna lie, challenging analysis from this, because if you imagine that those dash cameras measured data 10 times a second, so you've got 10 times a second for 2 weeks worth of driving worth of data. We had millions and millions and millions of data points to analyze this, so it really was a challenge. But again, that's probably for another talk. But what we did find from this, and I think this is really wonderful, the fact that we took these results in the lab and we've found very similar on the road as well. What we found was that the mindfulness, so the top graph there is those drivers who went over 70 miles an hour, so obviously going over 70 miles an hour, you're not supposed to go over 70 miles an hour anywhere in the UK. And we found that actually our car maintenance were trained drivers were more likely to go over that 70 mile an hour than our mindfulness trained drivers. We also found that the maximum speed that drivers on average were doing was higher in the car maintenance trained than mindfulness trained as well. So that's very interesting. You know, it's showing they're not going as fast as the car maintenance trained ones. But I think perhaps the most impressive thing out of all of this was we looked at their sort of speed signatures, and we developed an algorithm based on speed to calculate instances of harsh braking and rapid acceleration. Now, if you may remember, about 25 minutes ago I said for study 1, we found that drivers had less speed variation, which was indicative of less braking, less harsh braking, and less instances of rapid acceleration. And what we found, we replicated within this study, was that actually those mindfulness trained drivers were less likely to have instances of rapid acceleration and harsh braking. Now, harsh braking wasn't quite significant, but it's that continuation of the findings. It's demonstrated it in the same way. And like I said earlier, the benefits of having the mindfulness trained drivers not having that acceleration and harsh braking is that they're going to have more time to react to things, and also it's better for the environment and all of the things that come with, you know, careful driving essentially. So our overall conclusions were that the 12-hour mindfulness course, yes, it can improve focus, decrease anger, and even influence eye movements and produce the smoother drive. However, reducing that course without having the extra practices and meditations, it gives some of the effects, but not all of the effects. But by really tailoring the courses and providing the online resources, providing extra meditations and practice, essentially, we can demonstrate that in a real world situation, drivers are going to have a smoother drive. The only caveat to all of this is, again, that engagement remains a significant covariate in all of this. So drivers, their engagement, the more they're engaged with it, the better the influence of it is in this. And that's about it, I think. Obviously, I want to say special thanks to David, that this was his project essentially, and Tom Good, who was the other researcher on this, and without him we definitely couldn't have done this study. But I'm now happy to take any questions if anyone's got any.
Did you want to share your screen, Victoria?
Yeah,
people that might want to put their hands up, or
sure,
just viewers gallery so we can see. If anybody would, thank you very much. Anyway, that was a fascinating talk. Very, really interesting to hear the information behind that study, Victoria. Thank you so much. Just like to invite anybody now, if you would like to ask a question. I've gone over a little bit, but if anybody's like to come on for a few questions, really appreciate Victoria to hanging on for a few questions if anybody would like to ask. Nick Reed, would you like to unmute yourself, Nick?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Victoria. Really lovely presentation, really enjoyed it. I wondered, I've done some work on CBT for drivers, not the training, but not the basic training for motorbikes, but the cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a similar kind of goals. I wondered if you thought about the potential for either from the vehicle or from a smartwatch monitoring driver state, and then trying to apply some form of mindfulness intervention live. Is that a potential future for the type of intervention that you've been studying?
I mean, I think that would be absolutely fascinating to do that. With a lot of these things, a lot of it's sort of logistics and equipment based, you know, trying to find something that you can kind of measure with. I know smartwatches now have got fantastic capabilities, but marrying the two, I'm sure it would be possible. Like I say, I'm not a mindfulness expert, but on the fly, I mean, possibly. I guess that would maybe have to direct that one to San, whether those sort of short ones could be of benefits. But I mean, it would be fantastic to look at that.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's I'm sure there's work to be done to find a way to create something that would be appropriate. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
We've got a couple of questions that have been written in the chat. Keith is asking, is it being taken any further? To your knowledge, is this research being taken any further, Victoria, or is that it for now?
As with everything with research and universities, you know, I don't work at the university anymore, but I have a strong connection with the university. It's all about funding, and you know, we got the funding from this, obviously from the Road Safety Trust. If we would have loved to take it further, but with road transport and sort of transport safety, there's very few grant bodies that we can go to for the money, and they often change their focus sort of each year and stuff like that. So and they maybe want to support something a bit different. If they've put a lot of money into the mindfulness stuff, they might want to look at something else. So with the university research, it's all about funding. We would love to have taken it further, and I mean, the cards are still on the table. We definitely will at some point, provided we hope we could get the funding for it. I think we are at the moment, we're in the process of writing up the publications, so the academic publications of the research. So perhaps when that's out there, that might sort of spur on taking it to the next stage. But I think we would have liked to have run this study was run 2017 this study started, so it finished in 2019, and even, you know, the stuff that we were using to measure in the cars, the dash cameras with telematics, I know even since then those things have come on even more. So it would be fantastic to, you know, try with even better equipment to measure things on the real road. So there's plenty of potential for taking this further. A lot of it just comes down to funding.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria. I think it's Ian got a question. Would you like to unmute yourself, Ian?
Victoria, that was really interesting presentation. I'm actually a PhD, I'm doing a PhD at the moment at Sheffield Uni, looking at impulsivity, and I was just interested if within your questionnaires you'd done anything around personality or impulsivity and correlations around that.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think off the top of my head which questionnaires we used. We used the DBQ, so the driver behaviour questionnaire, which obviously looks at errors, violations, slips and lapses, and something else as well that I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I think we have looked at impulsivity ones in there before, but we never really found anything. It wasn't sort of really a focus of the task, or if it is, honestly, I can't remember because it was quite a while ago, and not like I wasn't, the questionnaires weren't in the talk, so I didn't really refresh myself that much on that point. But I don't think we did actually have anything there on impulsivity. We might have done, but if it may not have shown up with that if it was in there.
Okay, that's fab. I was just wondering if you'd picked up anything on the groups who dropped out, whether or not there was, you know, any personality traits in there. But no, that's fabulous. Thanks ever so much, Victoria. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Ian. And also, Brett has asked in the chat, is it possible to get a copy of the final research? I believe that has been published, hasn't it, Victoria?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to send anyone a final copy of it, but I think if you just Google NTU mindfulness study road safety trust, something along like those lines, it's probably one of the first ones that comes up.
Yeah.
And you can download it. I mean, it is a meaty report, not gonna lie. It's about 200 or 300 pages worth of research, so I think me trying to sum it up in sort of half an hour probably doesn't do the whole project justice, to be honest.
There is a very useful summarized PDF. This, I think it's on my blog page actually, that anybody can access. And I can certainly put a link to the full report if anybody would like to look at that. Thank you. Somebody's asking as well, understanding the possibility of end-alls. Is there any assets from the study that can be used by others? Keith Baldock says we run a short mindfulness intervention social media campaign with some backup online material, but would love more for a reboot. So more requests for information there.
That's an interesting question. Obviously I think we have the course itself, where the IP rests for that. I think that might now actually belong to the company, so I'm not sure, but I'm sure something could be done, so feel free to contact me about that one.
Thank you. So just looking through some of the things in the chat here, Neil says thank you, Victoria, for a great presentation. If you look down the tunnel to the eventual outcome of the study, how do you see the mindfulness aspects being delivered to drivers? Voluntary course or something that would be brought about after police prosecution or diversion schemes?
Sorry, was that in the chat? That was quite.
That's in the chat. Yeah.
I can't see that.
I think it's a direct message.
Oh, is it?
Yes. Yeah, so
whether it can be applied to after offending.
Yeah, voluntary course. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? I think the research is so interesting. It's so good to have, but obviously what's not been done yet is this bringing it forwards to actually make it into something that can be used for end-alls, or, you know, around any kind of CPD or any other kind of interventions. So there's a lot of scope, but I think we're kind of at the early stages, aren't we, with all of this stuff?
Yeah.
Did anybody else want to offer a question before we wrap up? Okay. Yeah. Okay, lovely. So yeah, if anybody, I mean, with regards to Eventbrite, this session has been recorded, so I'm happy to post the session on Eventbrite, and any links I guess I could post on Eventbrite actually, couldn't I? That would probably be the easiest thing. Thanks, Bill. Bill saying exciting prospects for road rage, anxiety and test day nerves. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and obviously at the moment, with regards to the Guild of Mindful Driver Trainers, the courses that we're running is focused on ADIs, supporting ADIs and enabling them to support their learners a bit more effectively. Again, this obviously encompasses all of these behaviours that Victoria's been talking about, as well as the fleet sector. So fascinating stuff. Thank you so much, Victoria. Really, really good to hear all that information. And thank you, everybody, for coming along this evening. It's been really, really great session. So we will. Yeah, thank you.
Me.
Thanks everybody. So yeah, I think we've better say. I think yeah, we can say cheerio. Thank yous. Yeah, lovely stuff. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Fascinating. All right, thanks everybody. Good to see you. Hang on, Victoria, just for one sec at the end. Thanks, guys.
Thanks ever so much. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.
You.
Jazz hands.